Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. My name is Amber Larkins, published photographer, storytelling expert, visual artist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. This podcast was born from one question: how do I get inspiring stories of triumph out to the people who need to hear them the most? Come with me, enter my world, where lives are getting changed, heroes are getting developed, and greatness is being achieved. All right, I am Amber Larkins, host of Through the Trauma podcast, and today I have an exciting guest that I'm very excited to bring on, Colin Kingsmill. It's so nice to have you here, Colin. I'm excited to talk to you. From the first time that we chatted, I knew that you'd be perfect for an episode with us because of just the childhood trauma, the different things that you have gone through in your life, and then just the amazing transformation that you have made, and the person that you are today. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. It's a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Are you in Alaska?
I'm not in Alaska, but some days it feels like it. I am in I'm in Nova Scotia in the Atlantic in Atlantic Canada. So we're just above Boston, really. It's not that far north, but we're on the Atlantic. It's chilly. Spring has just arrived the other day. So
I don't know why I was thinking Alaska, but I thought cold when you told me where you're from. It's like, Alaska.
I used to live in British Columbia, so that's right below Alaska, but not quite that chilly.
Well, Colin, tell us a little bit about who you are and introduce yourself to our guest.
So I am Canadian and Swiss. My mother was Swiss and my dad's Canadian, and I kind of grew up between both countries, back and forth, and raised in British Columbia and raised in Switzerland. And for the past 20 years, I have been in management consulting, in destination real estate and hospitality and tourism. So I've really lived and worked all over the world, and kind of said yes to opportunities that I knew nothing about. Right. So in 2009, I was asked if I wanted to do a project in Montenegro. I didn't know where that was. I just said yes. I thought it was Montevideo, actually. And then ended up spending 6 years over there in post-communist emerging market ex-Yugoslavia. So yeah, but I've lived and worked from Bora Bora to the Maldives and everywhere in between. And I guess that's kind of has allowed me to have a wider angle lens on this life that we're all living.
That's a very exciting lifestyle. I know so many people would love to be able to travel like that.
I'm grateful every day for it. And I don't think any of my friends thought I was really working. They would look at my Facebook or look at Instagram, and I'd be like, on some island, and they're like, "Are you sure you're working?" And but when you work in hospitality and destinations and resort real estate and things like that, you're always in sort of beautiful places. But it was work. It was hard. But last year, I decided to return to Canada and live in the country and work from a really peaceful, quiet place close to nature, so I could really be in a good space for my clients.
Yeah, I think that might be why I thought Alaska, because I always think of peaceful terrain in Alaska.
Yeah, I think when we first chatted, had first call, I did describe where I live. So I'm right on the ocean with the forest behind me, and it's a very quiet. I mean, it's kind of like the town is like a Hallmark rom-com movie set, it's with lots of picket fences and very competitive Christmas lights and Easter decorations, and so. But it's great. I walk out my front or back door and I'm immediately in nature, and it's amazing. So it's a good place to work from.
Yeah.
Feels very remote. It does feel remote, like Alaska. So
I crave nature like that. It's a newfound love that I have. So, um, well, Colin, you have a very interesting story, and I definitely want to jump into that. Um,
Sure.
why don't you start sharing with us just a little bit about the childhood trauma and how you discovered that?
Yeah. So it was funny because for most of my life, well, for almost my entire life until about a year ago, I thought I had a really idyllic childhood. And, I kind of grew up on an island, in the forest. And then I grew up in an orchard with a sort of a hobby farm kind of thing. And for all intents and purposes, those were amazing experiences for a young kid. But I didn't really remember any of it until last year when I was given a gift of letters. And they were a package of letters from my mother to her best friend at the time when I was growing up, sort of between 5 and 10 or 5 and 12. And I really only had to read two or three of them to recognize and remember all of those years that were really, really traumatic. And it was like being hit by a train last summer, actually. And it all came back. It all came out, and it was just this floodgate that got opened, and it just reminded me. I remembered finally that I was very lonely. We lived in technically beautiful places, but I was really separated from anyone and everyone else my age. And we were under enormous financial distress. And that ensued in divorce. And then we moved across the world to another country where I had no friends. I didn't know the language. I was just, once again, I was a foreigner, right? I
So this was
was,
when you were a
I was
child.
yeah, this was when I guess I was 10 or 11 when we left Canada and moved to Switzerland. But between 5 and 10, I remember, not there was discomfort when we were going, at the grocery store. I lived, my father was an artist, or he still is an artist, and he decided that, living in the forest in the dark and not having curtains as a child was maybe a good thing. And I know that might sound reductive, but I was living in a forest miles away from my school. I didn't have any connection to anybody. I would go to school and I would be the odd man out and very, very lonely. So I know, and I'm sure I know there was bullying going on because I was different. And that happened, that went on for years and years. So, so it, what happened was, as a result of those sort of 7 or 8 years of early childhood development being so stressful and so different and so out of place, um, and I compensated that for 45 years with overachieving, overworking, workaholism for sure, lots of coping mechanisms, alcohol and um, uh, yeah, just now that I look back, I think, wow, this whole core wound of sort of unworthiness took me through life. And that's why I'm now on a mission just to say, hey guys, uh, if you don't recognize these traumas, right? You see life through those filtered lenses, and I don't think you have to. So I'm on a mission to help people discover their trauma, recognize it, understand where it came from, shine some light on it and forgive that child that was coping, but allow yourself to deconstruct that narrative that got you here and rebuild a new one, because we all deserve it.
I think there is I do believe that sometimes people will it's like they force things. And I see it in my own personal life, how, I mean, I'm in my 40s now, but
Yeah.
I remember, my 20s and my 30s, even, like, I remember pushing through, just trying to like push through things and fight through it. And I think there's a time and a place for that. But then there's also a very important place in being able to stop, recognize what's going on, be aware of what's going on, so we can, like you said, deconstruct. I love that term for what that looks like really in trauma, is being able to deconstruct what has been formed. It's like clutter
Yeah.
sometimes gets in there and it starts to resonate, and then we start to react based on those things. So I love what you're
Yeah.
I love the way you describe that, but I love what you're doing with it as well.
Well, when I read the letters, or a few of them, and I had this sort of this wave of memories and pain kind of come at me, I immediately, because I'm in the coaching world, I immediately went and got some therapy sessions with a trauma and loss therapist. I re-engaged with my coach, who I've had for 10 years or 12 on and off, and I dove into reading about it. Gabor Mate has a beautiful book called The Myth of Normal, which just came out recently. I just grabbed the trauma by the neck, if you want, and I said, oh boy, what a gift this has been. I'm not going to let this affect me anymore. And because what it does to us as adults is even in the workplace, for example, we can't say no, right? Or we're not good at setting boundaries, or we're not good with self-esteem or self-care. So we don't necessarily um, socialize or have a good team environment. Uh, it leads to, even the whole idea around lack versus abundance. In the workplace, if you're coming at it from a lack perspective, you're always kind of you're always chasing the solution, that maybe money or finances or that contract or whatever. You're always grabbing at something that you don't have. And I think recognizing the trauma and recognizing the conditioning and the coping mechanisms that you created as a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old. I mean, I have a coaching client who I've worked with for a couple of years now, and we chatted recently about her experience in an office in London. And she said, she was like, Colin, I don't know why, but I'm like always trying to fix the situation in the office. And we dug a little bit into it, and the reason she's doing that is because her, as a young child, felt she always had to fix everything at home as the eldest daughter. you know and they didn't go through divorce or anything like that, but two working parents and a couple of brothers and sisters, and she's the oldest and felt like she had to take control of everything. And she's translating that into the office at 24 years old. but
Yeah,
but
it's
how
totally
is that serving you?
it's
Right.
totally normal, I think, for that to happen. Where
Yeah.
I've read that our psyche is kind of formed during that first 7 years of our lives. So
Yeah.
everything after that is deprogramming. Like, we have to, everything's
Yeah.
kind of established, and then it's
Yeah.
deprogramming. But so many people won't dig back into those childhood traumas because they hurt, they're hard, and sometimes it's scary because you don't know what you're going to find when you dig back into those early places of, this is what's happened. Our brain is a very amazing
Yeah.
thing.
I totally agree with you. I'm kind of taking it not a step further, but kind of saying, we're not taught to deal with trauma. Like we're not taught that these coping mechanisms that we bring through adulthood are the result of that sort of singular event, right? So I'm like, well, why isn't this stuff taught in school? Why are we given medication for anxiety, right? Or depression, or, whatever.
Mhm.
Uh, Instead of going back to the origin story. So I would say I would totally agree with you. They're not great places to go back to, but I would argue that we're not even sort of taught to go back and look for small t trauma, right? It feels like we're allowed to talk about the big T trauma, the stuff that's on the news, but the stuff that is so basic to those early childhood years of development and brain development and pattern development, we're not taught to go back in time and examine those eras, right? Those eras of early childhood development. And I think we would do a great service to people, to make trauma, small t trauma, um, less of a stigma.
I talk to people and they have these amazing stories of like triumph. And I'm like, people need
Mm,
to hear that story. And I've
yeah.
had people tell me before, my story is not traumatic. My story is not, no one
Mm,
would care to hear this. And it's like those things, everyone interprets trauma differently. So, what could be traumatizing to one person could not be so much to the other. And
mm,
those, what seems to be small in like childhood trauma, sometimes that's not small at all. It's manifesting in our body in the form of getting sick or reacting or, all these different ways. And it's like if we could
yeah.
just dig in and get to the root of that, no matter how small, your parents yell at you. It might not
Yeah.
affect one person, but it may affect someone else tremendously. And there's nothing too small. And I try to get that message to people like, there's really nothing too small because we all interpret things differently.
I totally agree, Amber. And I mean, just in my case, right? I growing up with no curtains on the windows in a forest. I mean, I was afraid of the dark my entire life. I mean, I'm over 50 now, and it took until yesterday to be comfortable with a forest, or swimming in water. I mean, it's a stupid story, but I went and saw Jaws when I was 10 or whatever, and my mother took me for swimming lessons the next day on an island. Like, we lived on an island, so here I am. The setting is the same, right? And I'm going to dark water, and again, it just affected me for my entire life, as did everything else. I mean, I spent I had a midlife crisis at 35 because I spent, you know 15 years building up a business and building up a life and getting married and having the right cars and having the right house and doing all of this stuff. It was like this checklist to compensate for being the weirdo kid that lived in the forest. And
Do you think that you were looking for validation in those things?
oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
find
Absolutely.
that is almost like a manifestation of like certain things that we've been through or we've interpreted or taken in when we're young. And then we have to seek out. And I think it's very common. People are, especially in the culture that we're in, they're looking for validation. I did in my own personal
Oh,
life.
oh, 100%. I mean, there's so much there's so much out there about the idea of unworthiness, right? That we are not worthy unless we go to the right school, marry the right person, have the right house, have the right job, dress the right way. You know the list, right? It's really not fair that society, you know, makes us react that way. I don't think. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, I mean, I spent 15 years, and I got to the point of so much pain and anger and frustration and depression and everything like that at 35 that I had to quit everything, give everything away, move continents and start again. Almost like a Buddhist monk would do. I just cleared the decks and pressed the
There's something
reset
to
button.
this. There's something to this though. I've been looking at this, and it's funny because I sometimes I catch like words, I'm a Christian. I believe it's God. God will put
Yep.
words in my mind. And one of the things
Sure.
that's been on my heart recently is just simplify. And I think there's something to that. And there's this idea I was reading about recently about identity shifting. So basically
Mm.
clearing out everything, moving to a new place, because you can become anything you want, just
Yeah.
setting your mind to it. And I think there is some power in being able to do that. So I'd love to hear you expound upon that
Mm.
just a little bit more, like your experience with that, because I'm very interested in hearing kind of from someone who's done it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I look back now and it was the darkest time of my life, right? Um, I had spent 15 years in banking, financial services. I set up a company with some partners. We had, I think, 25 employees at the time. I had I had everything you were supposed to have, right? By modern Western, um, what's the word? Modern Western success standards. And I remember one day I had a spiritual awakening, and I just woke up and it just was all wrong. And I don't know if that was God or the universe or how it happened, but I woke up and literally it was a Friday. It was like, I remember the day. It was April 2001. And I just woke up and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. None of it is serving me or serving anybody else, right? I was just this angry, greedy, uh, awful version of me, and I gave everything away. Like, I gave Cartier watches to my cleaning lady. I drove my Range Rover back to the garage. I drove my Audi TT, which I was so proud of because it was the first one in in town. I just I just gave it all away. And I moved back to Vancouver, British Columbia, because I thought that would be a sort of a wholesome, natural place to start over. And and look, I would recommend it to anyone. Martha Beck has a beautiful, relatively new book out called The Way of Integrity, and she did the same thing a few years ago. She found out, I don't know what her moment of illumination was, but she 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 was a Harvard professor. She was married. She had family. She had all that checklist that I had, and she gave it all up and started over. And she said, that she uses Dante's Inferno as a metaphor throughout the book of a journey to integrity. But I think, Amber, uh, I think I think living in integrity is so important for yourself, for the people around you, for your family, for your friends, for your mental health and your physical health. And the amazing thing is, now today, 20 years ago, it was, the power of thinking and the power of thought and all these things were kind of woohoo, right? It was a little bit ethereal but now it's all documented. Scientific research is showing how important it is to live in integrity. And so I would recommend anyone in your audience who's listening to think about that and think about. I love the idea of the identity reset. That's a really interesting way of putting it too, because if you're not living in integrity and the identity that you truly believe in or truly are, you're just going to get sick. And I think the numbers around psychological suffering in the United States and everywhere are proving that we are disconnected from that source. So yeah, do it.
I was having a conversation on another podcast with another guest yesterday, and this issue of like baggage, which that's not the terminology she used, that's what I used, but I imagine it like that. Like we collect all these little pieces as we go along life. And if we are not taking time to be aware of the things we need to let go of, or how to process those things before we can throw them away or whatever, like we're just collecting them. And if you think of a house with a bunch of clutter, what can you do in a house? If it's filled with clutter or filled to the brim with stuff, you can't do anything. So your brain, I think, is similar. You have to clean that stuff out so you can start to fill it with the things that are valuable and important.
Well, that's beautifully said, and I completely agree. And if you don't clear out the house, something is going to start rotting, right? And if you translate that into the body, if you're holding that energy inside, right, that baggage, it is physically something heavy inside of you. And I know that since I discovered this unrecognized trauma and I cleared the house, I feel like 20 pounds lighter. I feel many days I feel like almost like I'm levitating, like I'm just kind of in the air. It has a huge impact on you. And I know even from I had this surgery 3 years ago, I guess. Because I wasn't speaking my truth, and because I was always trying to people please, and because I didn't set boundaries, I wasn't expressing myself, right? Well, guess what happened, Amber? I actually had to get upside down stomach surgery because my stomach escaped the diaphragm and came up into my lung cavity. Like it just came up here. I mean, talk about when the body says no, right? So, so to your audience, I'm just saying, clear the house out of baggage, because if you don't, that baggage turns into dis-ease.
Yeah. And it gets heavy. If you think like I'm an overpacker. So when I think of going on a trip, I pack all the things that I think I could need. But trying to carry that stuff through the airport is really uncomfortable. So I've learned as I've aged to pack more lightly. But it's a visual of really what we need to do in our spiritual life, in our mental health. Like, get rid of some of that stuff. It gets heavy when you have to carry it.
It gets really heavy. And so what I do with my coaching is I ask people to think about, what are the possibilities if you were free, right? What are the possibilities? What could you do? How could you be more impactful? How could you be a better person and serve humanity if you weren't bogged down by all of those stories and all that baggage and all those narratives? I mean, they're like clinging you down, right? And I think it also, I'm sure you've had people on your show and spoken to people about, you look at life through a different lens. I think, the lens of lack, or the lens of unworthiness, or the lens of other traumas and things like that. What if you were free of that? That's my question, is what if you were free of these things, these lenses, these filters that you see life through?
It's up
Yeah.
to us, I think, to determine, because I think sometimes people don't realize they are viewing things through a lens. They're just reacting. So they don't know that
Hmm.
there's like this lens of, you know, it's going through this lens of this type of trauma, whatever that type of trauma is.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
if we can first become aware of what's happening,
Hmm.
and secondly, be able to have the tools. And this is where, I mean,
Yeah.
I believe wholeheartedly in having therapists, having therapy, having coaches. I would have a coach for every area of my life if I could afford it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I love having someone to like bounce ideas and to show me, to put that mirror in front of my face and show me these are the lenses that I may not be noticing, but it
Yeah.
is making me react or making me be a certain way. Or so I think that's really important. I want you to tell us a little bit about.
Yeah.
So you said something interesting before we jumped on. You said that
Yeah.
you are a whole human coach, and I know
Mm.
this is a little different than the typical life coach, fitness coach, business
Hmm.
coach, whatever you could put in front of the word coach. Explain a
Yeah.
little bit of that to us. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So it's how do I explain this? Um, First of all, I think our modern Western society has lost touch with our humanity. Okay, so that's the starting point. Is we are surrounded by distractions, surrounded by a news cycle, surrounded by identity politics, surrounded by all this noise that gets us away from our core humanity as one species on this little rock, right? That's traveling 1,700 kilometers or 1,000 miles an hour. It's around, it's spinning spinning around 1,000 miles an hour. So we came up with whole human coaching because of the complexity of the world we're living in, of the fact that everything is so hyper novel. I mean, we've only had social media for 20 years and we don't even know the impact, the long term impact of it on our minds and our brains and our physiology. And our biology, our evolutionary biology, has not caught up with the modernity of the last sort of 70 years. So the idea of whole human coaching, or looking at people holistically, is is going beyond the boundaries of, say, the International Coach Federation, which have amazing models. They're great, but we think they need to be amplified because of the complexity of the world that we live in, and because of the complexity of our day-to-day lives. We're under an enormous amount of pressure. Work and school and life in general, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of whole human coaching is, let's look at you. Let's look at all of you. Okay. So in a traditional coaching model, I might not ask you about your nutrition. I might not ask you about your relationship with alcohol. I might not ask you about other coping mechanisms like drugs that may not show up in a traditional coaching conversation. And because of the hyper novelty of the world, and the constant change, we ask permission to give you some advice, to give you some ideas, to give you some things to think about, to refer you to other healing transformative solutions that are out there. So really, whole human coaching is just recognizing how challenging the world is today, taking the coaching models that everybody adheres to from the International Coaching Federation and saying, hey, let's amplify those. Let's ask more questions. Let's have a human relationship. And, it may be discussing trauma, right? So that's really what it is. It's kind of taking the models of coaching and just amplifying them to reflect modernity. A little bit like, we just did a workshop on performance reviews, right? Annual performance reviews. Well, those are kind of in, they're kind of a, what's the word? they're from a different era, right? When factories and widgets were being produced. We're much more complicated today. So the idea is really look at the old way of doing something and reimagine it to reflect our diversity, our complexity, and all this stuff that's going on.
This totally makes sense to me. And as you're talking, and this, I guess I would like to ask if this is kind of what you're talking about, because the way I envision it is, it is true that our whatever things we're dealing with, those are the things that we kind of struggle with. And if we're
Mhm.
struggling with a certain area, whether that be relationship, financial, or fitness related, physical, or
Sure.
whatever, we're struggling with these areas. It's up to us to find out why that particular thing is manifesting in our lives. And
Mhm.
I love the idea. It's almost like college. So it's like, hey, take some time, work on this area of your, like, we're going to coach you through this area. But it's
Yeah.
not like you have a curriculum of these are the things you should be doing. But it's like, once you kind of accomplish this thing, then we're going to attack the next big thing. And I love that because I truly believe everybody needs therapy and coaching. So I love this model. And I don't even know if this is the model that you're kind of describing, but this is how I see it when you're talking.
That I think that's a really good analogy, actually, because, and I'll give you another analogy, right, of how divided we are. In the United States, when you go to medical school, you have to choose one of, I think it's 40 or 41 different specialties, right? So we as whole humans get divided up into 40 categories. And that doctor or that specialist will look at you from a very sort of restricted um, perspective. But what about the other 39 parts of you? You know,
Mhm.
so you're absolutely right. It's the idea of whole human coaching is just to I love that. I love the college curriculum analogy. That's really beautiful because that's exactly what it is. It's like, we're all complex. We live in complex times. We are bombarded by many, many different challenges. Trauma amplifies and adds to that. So let's look at the whole picture, um, and put it back together the way you want it.
I love it. I love that. So, Colin, tell us, so you transitioned your whole life. So you had basically,
Yep.
you discovered some things, you realized some childhood trauma, you took
Yeah.
everything that you had built, which was
Mm-hmm.
remarkable. You built a remarkable life, and
Yeah.
you kind of cleaned that out, and
Mm-hmm.
then kind of explain to us where that leaves you today. I know your heart is bent on coaching and loving on people and
Yeah.
helping them,
Yeah.
but kind of tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I mean, look, I kind of pressed the repeat button, right? I went back to Vancouver and I started over and I started a new career. And I gotta say, I got captured by the sort of the cultural societal expectations, and I continued to overachieve. I continued to say yes. I continued to take on projects that, looking back, I don't know, I probably shouldn't have, or I wouldn't have, from the perspective of today. But during the pandemic, I decided that I wanted to come home again. I just spent the last 12 years in Europe. I don't know. It was kind of like not it wasn't like a second midlife crisis, but it was an awakening that happened to me last year. I intuitively knew I wanted to come home. I didn't realize how important home was, until just recently. And I'm living. It's so funny. I have a red barn that I had when I was a child, like when I was 5. Before all the trauma started, I had a red barn, and and here I have it again, which is so funny. So I went through kind of a process of doing it twice, which is interesting. Hey, I don't know where you segue with that one, but in the process of going, oh, hold on, I'm doing this again. I'm chasing, with my coach, we came up with this thing called Seeking Fabulous. And I should trademark that, actually, but I think I was seeking fabulous again. And I just woke up during the pandemic going, oh, hold on, what am I doing? I don't need this. I can see the coping mechanisms switching on again. I certainly started from scratch and moved back to Canada last year, and moved to a place of nature and serenity to serve others and to care for others and to give them a hand and to pull them out of um, the drowning place that they may be in. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just really wanting to use my experience to say, look, it doesn't have to take you 30 years to get out of the space and place you're in. I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
I've done it. I've done it a couple times.
That's
I
beautiful.
just want to pull people out.
So tell us, you're writing this book. Also, tell us about the book and tell us about what you would recommend. Like, say somebody came to you and they said, I am in the middle of trauma. I realize I have
Mm-hmm.
some childhood trauma. I don't know how to get to the bottom of it. What
Mm-hmm.
resources would you recommend to them?
Well, there's some beautiful, first of all, Gabor Mate. I think Dr. Gabor Mate from Vancouver has got some amazing books. When the Body Says No is a classic. That's probably 20 years old now. He just came out with a book called The Myth of Normal.
Is he the one that did The Body Keeps the Score?
Yes. Yep.
The, yeah, I thought so. I read that book. Very powerful book.
Yeah. Well, his new book, The Myth of Normal, is so good, Amber, because he's looking at our society today and going, this is not normal. Right? We there's no reason why we all need to be hyper medicated, right? Or addicted to drugs or alcohol or whatever. So I mean, it's a big juicy book. It's not an easy read, but that's a great he's an amazing resource. And if you can't afford the books, he's on YouTube. He's done lots of free stuff online that you can dive into. I think another really important book that came out recently is Martha Beck's The Way of Integrity, because again, when we are disaligned with our true selves, um, we become sick and we become unhappy and we become depressed. We have dis-ease if we're not there. So those are two authors that I would absolutely recommend. Another I think great tool is the app called Waking Up, and that's by a gentleman called Sam Harris. And I I've never been able to meditate, right? Or even sit and pray or nothing. I just train going 100 miles an hour. But but the Waking Up app starts you off with a 10-minute guided meditation, and it's always Sam and it's always his voice and it's always so clear and easy. I started off doing 10 minutes and then I started to do 20, and then now I if I don't have between 20 minutes and an hour of meditation a day, I'm craving it, right? Whereas before I never used to. I guess I never, when I moved back to Canada at 35 after my first sort of midlife crisis, I dove into the spiritual bookstore. I read every book that possible. I just grabbed it all, but I never really embodied it. And that's a really important thing for I think your listeners too, is because we can read at the, and kind of know what we're supposed to do. But then if we don't embody it in the energetically and in our soul, we're not gonna get great results. So a couple of books, definitely the app. I think mindfulness is so important, and that can be expressed through prayer or other tools. They don't necessarily have to be prayer, but certainly mindfulness is a huge contributor.
I would just add to that gratitude. That's a big
Oh,
thing that has
yes.
helped me. Mhm.
Yeah, beautiful. That's a
Yeah.
perfect period to the end of my rambling sentence.
So tell us about your book. The book that you have. Is it for people that are trying to overcome trauma?
It certainly is. It certainly is, because I think fear is such an insidious thing in our society, and it permeates everything people do, and the way they act, and the way they make decisions, and the way they plan. And so I'm on this mission to help people be fearless. So I'm basically using my life of fearlessness and jumping in the deep end multiple times and not knowing what's next. So I've come up with 8 steps really to help people live. So the subtitle is Crossing the Bridge from Fear to Bliss. And so I've come up with really kind of an eight step strategy to help you get there. And we don't have to dive into it now because we've only got a short amount of time left. But it's really about, stop absorbing negativity, design a new life, design steps and goals that can get you towards that. So break down that vision board, break down the big picture into smaller pictures. Another step is to forget what you've learned, and by that I mean forget the conditioning that is not serving you anymore, and that's where trauma, comes in. The daily rituals, right? So meditation, mindfulness, gratitude, absolutely. And then forget about what others think, and not in a malicious way, but we're on this planet for a reason, and it's not to be serving other people's judgment. There's another reason you're here, so let's talk about that, as opposed to maneuvering around the real essence of who you are.
I totally agree with you there. I think that, and in my own walk, my own experience, I struggled with fear a lot, and it holds you back from doing the thing that you're supposed to do, especially when you fear criticism or judgment, or how are people going to perceive me. And I have to ask myself this on a very extremely regular basis, like, am I worried about what people are going to think? Like, just do it. Just make the post. Just do the whatever I'm doing at the moment, and don't fear what other people are going to think, because if you reach one, then it's impactful. If you reach one, you've made an impact.
This is the reason why I'm writing it, and it's in developmental edit right now, but it just imagine the possibilities of the impact that you can have if you become fearless. And we're all here for some reason. We don't quite know what it is, but fear is certainly clouding your path. So that's why I'm writing it.
That's awesome. So is it for sale now, or is it?
No, it's not. It'll be beginning of next year. I've gone back to the drawing board with my editor because I needed to dive deeper into a few things, and through conversations like this, I'm discovering more meat and potatoes to put into the equation. So it'll be next year.
Yeah. So tell my listeners where they can, if they wanted to gain more information. We can put your specific links as far as, how to get in touch with you, but just briefly tell, like, website, are you on social media?
Yeah, so I'm my website is just colinkingsmill.com, so that's super easy to find. There's not many of us out there. Um, I am on LinkedIn, so grab me there as well. And Instagram some days, but I don't know about you, but it feels like Instagram just turned into TikTok last year. And I used to just like the pictures and the sayings and stuff, and now it's all video. So I don't know. I've got a bit of a love-hate relationship with Instagram, but I'm there too. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this conversation has been phenomenal. I really enjoyed speaking to you. You have a lot of amazing insights, and I'm excited to see everything that you're gonna go and do, and the transformations that you're gonna help people have. It's just amazing. Um, are there any last things you would like to share with us before we close up?
No, I thank you. First of all, thank you very much. It's been a great conversation. I've loved chatting with you. I guess the only thing that I would say to everyone is, if you are suffering, it doesn't have to be like this. There's a way out.
Mm-hmm.
You don't deserve it, and you have a birthright to be happy and joyful and full of love. So, yeah, whatever you can do,
Amen
whatever
to
you can
that.
do. Yeah, there you go.
That's so powerful. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming on today, and thanks for sharing with us. It means the world to me and to my guests, I'm sure. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll see you soon. Take care, Amber.
Thank you for listening to Through the Trauma podcast. If you have found value in this episode or believe in the mission behind what we are doing, please subscribe so that you never miss any future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our transformation project at transformationthroughtraumaproject.com, where we help inspirational stories get heard on a larger scale through multiple platforms. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.